Welcome back to our next section, Surviving the Zombie Apocalypse, Rez Style. We're so excited to be able to have you back. I got to be a panelist this last time. Now I get to be sort of a host, at least an intro host man, something like that. But just in time for all the scariness is one of my favorite peoples, Johnny J. I'm going to introduce you and talk about some Rez stuff. And I know you got like Rez zombie stuff. And I know you got like slides and a whole thing because I've seen this one before because I think it was previewed a while ago and I'm very excited. So it's really good to see you again from, like 3 minutes ago. And yeah, so I'm going to let you take it away and do your thing. Talk to us about zombies and Rez Style. The only thing I will tell everybody is you're missing the in-person part is the best part about this, to actually be able to hold the zombie killer, the Rez Style zombie killer. It's right there. So that is one thing that hopefully we'll be able to put that up into the museum display someday when we have our Indigenous gallery, and you'll be able to see what that looks like to survive the zombie apocalypse, Rez Style. So Johnny J, take it away. So good to see you.
Oh, thank you, Lee. Hey, everyone. It's me, Johnny J, and I am the founder of A Tribe Called Geek. And today I am going to be leading you through how to survive the zombie apocalypse, Rez Style. And to get this started, let's get started here. Well, a lot of people are wondering, especially now that we are kind of in an apocalyptic event with this pandemic, which really kind of, has been interesting because I've been doing this workshop for about 6 years now and talking about Indigenous survival. How did we survive and how would that help us survive any other apocalypse that comes our way? And it's been kind of funny because a lot of the information that I'm going to be giving you today has absolutely been kind of helping me through the pandemic in various ways. And so let's get started. So a lot of people also ask, why zombies? This is something that I feel a lot of people have a very basic knowledge of. And natives, we've already kind of gone through our own apocalypse. We've already gone through, which could very well be a zombie apocalypse because settler colonialism is based on just consuming everything in its path. And this is what you are seeing on the screen now. All of the land was native land. And then as time went on, you could see it being decimated, being taken and disappearing. And, this has been part of our apocalypse, is learning how to live in this new world when even our population has been decimated. At one point in our history, there were only 250,000 native people left. And that's very, very few. And especially when you're looking at our population now. The recent census put us around 8 to 10 million, which is a huge jump from previous census years because the last census had us at about 5 million people, which is very small. 5 million means that we could fit the entire US native population into one metropolis. And a good example of that metropolis would be Detroit. The Detroit metropolis could house every single native in the US based on past census. Now we could probably move into a larger city. But, so I think it's important to kind of understand, for natives, we have already survived an apocalypse and we have the tools, we have the knowledge to allow us to survive anything that comes our way. And one of the ways that we've been able to survive is that we know our strongholds. And I always love this little clip from Thunderheart. So I'm going to share that with you guys now. As you kind of saw there, in the scene, the two good guys are surrounded and they think that, they're pretty sure they're going to die. And, they're already kind of making their peace. And then all of a sudden you see all these natives coming up behind them and they all know where to go. And this is because Native people have always known our strongholds. And throughout this movie, there's people have been telling him, run for the stronghold. And he didn't understand what that meant. But for Natives, our communities always knew where we could go to be protected. We had fortified areas of land, of, even just communities where we knew we could best be protected and where we could make a stand in battle. Some of our traditional strongholds that I think that everybody could kind of learn about because the information is there, and you could still go and visit these places. You have Palo Duro Canyon, the Grand Canyon, Canyon de Chelly, Unakizan, and Mabia. All of these were traditional Native strongholds. These were all areas that Natives knew that they could go for protection and where they went to kind of make stand against their enemies. For a lot of these strongholds, we kind of don't remember, especially as younger generations, like why these areas are so important. So I think it's really just, sorry about that. I think it's really important for us to understand, like our strongholds are still here and that they still have a lot of value and they can still fortify our communities in many ways. For example, Mabia is one of my favorite strongholds as a Choctaw woman, because this was an entire village that was fortified for war. And a lot of the times, we get this idea that Native people were very primitive, that we just kind of were on horses and we were shooting bow and arrow, that there wasn't a lot of strategy put into battle, that we just rode in and were very impulsive. But that's not exactly true. Indigenous people were very strategic in the way that we went into battle. And Mabia was an entire community. This was a city that was used for trade during the day, but it could also house up to 1,500 warriors. And every single building was able to hide these warriors. Even on the outside, they had holes dug into the ground and that were covered that warriors could hide in for surprise attacks. And this was a huge city. And for most people going through this city on a day-to-day basis, they could trade, and it was just like any other village. And this was very important in Choctaw history because it was the site of a huge battle. I really wish I could kind of just draw a picture of this village because I only have like what I could create in my imagination from the examples, but this was also built along the Palisades, and there was an entire gate around this community. This wasn't just like a city that you could walk into. You had to pass through a gate. There was only one entrance in, and one way out. There was no, sneaky way for anybody to kind of get into this. But at the time of the battle that took place here, one of the leaders had been taken captive and was being taken to Mexico to be executed. And they stopped at this village. He convinced the soldiers who were taking him to Mexico that if they stopped here in this village, that they could get supplies, that he could get the people to, basically give them the supplies without payment, and that they could have shelter. And he knew exactly what this village was. And he had already made plans and let people know, like, hey, if I'm captured, this is the plan. And so he basically led them into a trap. They show up to this place and they come in thinking it's just going to be like any other city. But once they get there, they start looking around and they realize, like, wait a second, there's something just a little bit off about where we're at. And what was off was the fact that there were no women, there were no children, there were no elders. They had already all been evacuated from this village, and it was just the warriors who were left. And as they were going through the village, they were, it wasn't just like they didn't just attack. They were there. They thought they were getting shelter. They thought they were getting supplies, and everything seemed really good. The plan had been not really just to attack, but it had been to free the leader and get him out of there before anyone could notice he was gone. But what happened was that there was a conflict between one of the soldiers and one of the village people, and it started the fight. And at that point, they realized, oh, wait a second, we're kind of outnumbered here. So it became this all-out war that went on for almost an entire day, to the point where both warriors on both sides of this battle were basically having to stop and drink water that was just covered in, filled with blood. There was a lot of casualties, but then they had to keep going because they were just trapped in this town. And eventually, the natives were able to drive out the soldiers, and they thought they had won. They thought the battle was done, and everybody was free, everything was good. But what happened was that the soldiers came back and they found the weakness. The weakness of this stronghold was the fact that there was only one entrance and one exit, and they set the entire village on fire. And it made it very difficult for a lot of people to escape. But it was such a huge, and I know that doesn't sound, oh, wait, the stronghold fell. But this was a huge stronghold that had been in use for decades. Like, this wasn't a new city. This was something that Native people knew how to use this stronghold. They knew how to use this. And it wasn't on, it wasn't in a mountainous range. This was on a plains area, very flat. And it shouldn't have been able to really exist or do as well or last as long with as many battles that this place had seen. But it was a place that was specifically fortified for war. And these are places that, as Native people, we need to realize, like, the land has a lot of the answers. And when we're talking about land back, it's not just that we're trying to get our land back. It's that we're also trying to protect that land because we know that the land is important to our survival, not only for the resources, but it holds the places that are very sacred, places that are used for ceremony, but also places that could offer a lot of protection, especially within a zombie apocalypse. A lot of natives are very urban. And so we've seen popular zombie movies where the first place that people want to go is to a Walmart or to, like a hardware store or the mall, and they want to hold themselves up because there are already resources there. But those resources, as you see, they run out and you're trapped in one area. And especially in urban areas, you're going to have a buttload of zombies surrounded by you at all times, which means that your survival factors are going to be very low. Which is why for natives, we have a better chance of survival because we know places that are not easily accessible and that not a lot of people know about. And this is why when we talk about land back, it's important just that we continue to have access to the places that our people hold in high regard and, that are sacred to us because we know what they can offer us. And boy, I could go on talking about the land for a long time because there are so many places in the US. But we also, when you're looking at popular zombie media, you also don't see a lot of natives. And a lot of times we're thinking it's because of, the typical erasure that we see of Native people in pop culture. But I think a lot of the times in my mind, I go to this place where, no, we are in our strongholds. We're living our best lives while everybody else is just kind of running around and not knowing what to do because we are communities and we still have the knowledge to live off the land. We know how to use the resources that are there. We know how to get water. We know how to get food. We know how to hunt. We know how to fish. And we know how to survive on little to nothing. Like, this is something that Indigenous people are very good at. And the second part of, how we're able to do this and, how our ancestors were able to survive everything that we've been through is through knowing how to communicate with each other. And, this is kind of like a little comic strip that I love, just because, a lot of people ask, well, if there's no internet, if the power lines go down and we lose all the modern ways of communication, what are we going to do? And for Native people, it's just like, okay, I don't want to be that stereotypical Native here, but we're going back to smoke signals. We have our own means of communication. For a lot of old school Native communication, we had smoke signals. We also used pigeons. There was also the Pony Express. We also had messengers, and we have radio. And let me just kind of go through this. I know pigeons seems like the wild part here, but for a lot of Native communities, we were able to train pigeons to relay messages from village to village. And this is something that was done for a long time. And it's something that we can absolutely do again, because when you just walk out the door and you go to a parking lot anywhere, we all know pigeons are everywhere. So it's not beyond the scope of reality that we could once again have carrier pigeons delivering messages from community to community. Pony Express, we have a lot of natives who own horses. We have a lot of natives who know how to, train horses, and we could go back to being able to deliver messages on horseback if need be, and being able to go from community to community. Like, this is something that we already have at our disposal. And then as far as messengers, we see this huge push right now happening with running. We see a lot of natives creating running groups and people getting into doing more long distance running marathons even. And a lot of people don't really understand. They think it's just like, oh, well, natives are athletic. But for Native people, running was very important. It was how we were able to relay messages. There were actually people who trained. There were games that natives played that were basically training natives to be able to run long distances. That way, in case there was an attack, they would be able to run to the next village to warn them or to let them know what the plan was for battle. So we had natives who were running back and forth. We look at other means. And for Choctaws, we play stickball. It was called the little brother of war. And it was an alternative to war in solving conflict between different villages and different tribes. We played stickball. And stickball right now is played like on a football field. But back in the old days, like, this was something that happened between villages. So there was a long distance between different villages at times, and stickball was played between those two villages. So it was something where communities would basically line up between the sides of the villages, and they would be able to cook meals for players so that they would be able to come out and rest, because this wasn't a game that had innings or time limits. Like, they would play until somebody won. And so people would line up, they would have cooks. The women who weren't playing, would have their sticks. And if somebody was slacking and not playing up to par, they would be out there, getting some encouragement. But, so running, we've seen this resurgence of natives being involved in running, which is good, because if we did lose communication, we would kind of have to find alternative ways to getting messages to each other. We would be able to find these runners and make them the tribal runners, and let them, run those long distances. Because, somebody like me is, I think I wouldn't make it a couple of steps before, an asthma attack hit or something. Radio is another way of communication that is very key for Native communities. Whereas a lot of people are starting to rely on digital radio, getting their radio stations through the internet. For Native communities, because we don't have the budget and because we don't have access to a lot of newer technologies, a lot of our communities still rely on old school radio. So if everything was able to go down, we would still be able to use our radio networks. And a lot of Native communities actually have their own radio stations. And it's a very popular way that most natives still get their news and still learn about what's going on in the world, especially for our elders. But we'd be able to use radio in order to communicate as well. So that's another way. But communication is always going to be key. We see this in a lot of popular zombie movies where they just don't know how to communicate with each other. We see a lot of conflict happening. We see, a lot of tragedy that could easily be avoided if they had been able to better communicate with each other. And this is something that, it's not just in terms of zombie apocalypse, but when we look at a lot of the issues that we're facing in the world, a lot of it is just due to the fact that we do not know how to communicate with each other as human beings. Because communication, it's going to be very different from community to community. And that's something that we don't always really think about. And it's not just in terms of language, but in tone and, the way that certain words may mean something different, or the way we say certain things may come off a little bit different to somebody else. And, we don't have a lot of interaction with each other or different communities. So we don't really know how to effectively communicate with each other, which is something that is going to be very important in case of a zombie apocalypse. We are going to need to know how to communicate with each other in order to help each other survive. One of the most important things that we're also going to have to know about is traditional medicines. And this is something that is very lacking in a lot of zombie films, because for the most part, they just let people die. They don't have a lot of doctors, and they're very lucky if they get doctors, or you see people just trying to do their best and thinking, oh man, you know what? I think I could do this surgery. I think I can, remove an appendix, and you see them cutting people open, and you're just like, whoa, like, okay, hold on. It's like you probably barely passed biology and you think you're pulling out an appendix. But traditional medicine is something that Native people have, always relied on and still do, especially in this pandemic. There have been really wonderful coalitions of Native women and healers that have come together to be able to provide medicine, traditional medicines, for different communities, for people affected by COVID, in terms of this pandemic, just because we don't always have access to the healthcare that we need. We don't have access to medical facilities. And so a lot of our communities, and especially, a lot of our elders and more traditional people, really have been learning and leaning more on our traditional medicines in order to treat, current ailments. And this is something that, I've been really kind of looking into as well, mainly because I have lupus. I have a lot of health issues because of having lupus. And I take a lot of medications, but if there were zombies, chances are our pharmacists are not going to be readily available to make sure that we have those medications, and they will at some point run out, even if we did go to a pharmacist and grab everything that they had. And yarrow, greenbrier, cattail is actually really cool because it's not something that you only use as medication, but it's something that can be used as food as well. Black gum bark, all of these traditional medicines here are things that we've always used. A lot of them for inflammation, for infection, as antiseptics. There's a lot of use in things that we really don't think about. And especially, it's important now, and we're seeing this resurgence as well in learning this ancestral knowledge and knowing how to use our traditional medicines, because we're starting to really reclaim the narrative that makes it known that the basis of all modern medicine is our ancestral knowledge. It's our traditional medicine. Everything that we do on a contemporary basis in terms of medical care and medication, has its basis in traditional knowledge, things that, Native communities, and not just Native, but Indigenous communities worldwide have always done in order to, help their community. And it's, sorry, let me go back here. And this is something that, like a lot of people have done a lot of research on in the last, I'd say probably about like 10 years. And where I've really seen a resurgence in traditional medicine being used, and not only used, but being taught, is what was at Standing Rock when they had their own, mobile health unit, where they had women who were bringing different cough medicines. They were creating, all these different medications and, ointments in order to treat injuries that were happening. And really, being in this place to really have people's attention and to really have a need to rely on traditional medicine again. I'm trying to remember where my list is. I don't see it on my slides, which is unfortunate. But I did have a list, and you know what? I'm going to link that list afterwards in the video on the chat that has how these different traditional medicines are specifically used. Because I saw somebody asking about honeysuckle. But all of these medications, yarrow, surprisingly, is something that caused me a lot of havoc when I lived in Oklahoma because of my allergies. But it's also something that can help with like inflammation. It helps with lupus. And this is something that I have used in the past in order to treat some of my lupus symptoms. And, like when we're talking about traditional medicine, when we're talking about survival, a lot of Native people, we've never viewed each other as expendable. And I know, like, when you're watching contemporary zombie movies, you see them leaving people that they consider weak behind. You see them leaving elders. You don't see them helping people who are disabled. But for Natives, we always valued all of our people, and we understood that, every single person had a role within our community, and they had knowledge that we needed. So we did our best to protect every single person. And, when we're looking at strongholds, when we're looking at traditional medicines, all of these things did include disabled people, especially our strongholds, because some of the strongholds were up on huge plateaus or in mountainous ranges where a lot of our disabled Natives and elders, who weren't physically able to get there on their own, had to be helped, and we did help them get there. We didn't just leave them behind, especially the elders, because they have a lot of the knowledge that we need to keep continuing our traditions. They have knowledge of our language. They're very important to us and sacred, and we've never viewed them as expendable. And this is something that when we're talking about survival, that we always need to be mindful of, that we're not looking at each other as expendable, that every single person is important and that they have a role to play in our communities. And this is one of the reasons, I've been really engaged in trying to learn more about our traditional medicines and how they're used, because we're going to have to find a lot of different alternatives for a lot of modern medication, especially now with this pandemic, when we're actually seeing new viruses coming into play and not having any experience with these viruses or how to treat them. This is one of the things that we're really facing now, because nobody in the world has a treatment for COVID-19. They're treating symptoms with other medications, trying to let the body, just heal and overcome a lot of complications that the virus is wreaking on the body in order for them to, eventually survive as the virus kind of, disappears and goes out of the body, and hoping that our body has just a fighting chance. But traditional medicines, right now they're looking into a lot of traditional medicines, believe it or not, as well as medications that don't necessarily, you wouldn't necessarily think of as treating an antiviral. There's a lot of research going on right now and just trying to find treatment for this new virus. So, it is important for us to learn about traditional medicines and to know how to use them effectively, because I see a lot of things on social media as well. And, they're talking about like, oh, we need to do traditional medicines. We need to do this. And you see them using things. I like hemlock, for example. I've seen a lot of videos of people trying to kind of give recipes for hemlock tea that would be able to treat to treat different ailments. And it's like, no. Like, you need to know how to use these medications. And because otherwise, if you're just going out and you're thinking, oh, well, we can use any plant as medication, not realizing that, certain things need to be used in a different way. You need to consider dosages. You need to consider how it's prepared, or how it's just gathered, even, because you can make something that could be beneficial very dangerous very quickly. So it's important to kind of like learn about this. And I'll provide a bunch of links and information that I have. Don't know why I deleted that slide, but I'll provide that after this for those who are interested in learning about traditional medicines, as well as links to some Native groups that are doing incredible work in being able to teach this medicine. Weaponry. This is my favorite part of learning about how to survive a zombie apocalypse or any apocalypse. We need to know how to protect ourselves. And a lot of people, like they value guns. They go straight for, like the guns. You see bats. You see a lot of different things being used. Bow and arrow. Things that, basically you get at the sports store. But you don't see a lot of survivors knowing how to make weaponry. And this was something that natives did very well and still do very well. The picture that you see on the top is what's called a stone skull cracker. And this is something that, I've learned how to make from my dad. He makes a lot of our traditional weapons as, for different museums and stuff. And I really love being able to learn from him because, it's a lost art. We don't really look at weaponry as, especially our traditional weaponry, as we don't see it having a purpose, except for being like decorative. But, I think if a zombie apocalypse happened, our native weaponry is going to be the perfect thing, because we're not relying on guns. We're not relying on a supply of bullets that will eventually be decimated. And these are things that can be done very quietly, so they're not drawing a lot of attention. The stone skull crackers are very easy to make. We also have the atlatls and war hatchets, bows and arrows, of course, jawbone clubs, and stoneball clubs, all of which could be very effective at cracking skulls and, really taking out those zombie brains. And, I showed a picture, or I showed a little glimpse earlier of the zombie cracker. This is my favorite weapon that I've made because, I've really had to think about, if we're in a more urban area, we're going to have to make weapons from what we find around us. We're not going to have access to all the materials that we need. So we're going to have to get crafty. This was made from just a board that I found outside in the garbage. A broken knife blade here, which is the blade for the skull cracker. And then, of course, I had to get native and decorated. I knew beads were not going to be that effective, or you wouldn't last that long. So I did some little studs here, but I base this off the old stock rifle hatchets that natives used to make. After battles, they would go and they would gather up the rifles, and they would use the butt of the rifles to make hatchets. And so that's what I kind of base this off of. But this is one of my favorite things. I love it. I call it the zombie whacker, and it is the best thing for home defense.
You gotta know that that's like one of the, like, we shouldn't be raiding any of these other places. We should be raiding native museums. Like, when the apocalypse happens, we should just go back and be like, no, we're reclaiming right now. We're just gonna need it for a little bit. We'll put it back after. Don't worry. And then just go in and then use that for all the things.
Oh, exactly. Like, our native weaponry is the best thing ever. Not only has it lasted for centuries, if you go to any museum, you will see the weaponry that they have on display, and it is very well made. It's very well preserved. And it's something that, we still know how to make. I know several friends who make native weaponry, and not only make the weaponry, but also run workshops that teach people how to use the weaponry effectively. And when we're looking at surviving a zombie apocalypse, we really have to look at these 4 key areas. When we're watching zombie media, we see everybody just kind of running around and just making things up as they go. But Native people have a plan. We've already survived an apocalypse before. So we know that the 4 things that we need to survive are our strongholds. We know we need to communicate. We know we need our traditional medicines and know how to use those medicines effectively. But we also know we need to know how to protect ourselves. And that's, not only doing traditional weaponry, but it's also kind of learning more about traditional fighting methods. Grappling was a huge thing that happened. Hand-to-hand combat was something that Native communities learned. And there are a lot of different Native fighting techniques that, we need to kind of bring back to the forefront and start learning about those, because we don't necessarily hear about them or even discuss them. But Indigenous people, we've basically been able to survive everything. And one of the key ways that we've done it is not just by, knowing the strongholds, but it's by looking at each other and taking care of each other and knowing that no person is expendable, that every single person is important to our communities. The knowledge that they hold is important. And it's not just going to be about bashing brains. It's not going to be about robbing each other of resources or just trying to take things and, trying to be very isolated, because I think Native communities know that there's strength in numbers. And we have shown in the past that through history that Native people, it's never just been about our survival. Even now, when we're out there and we're fighting, pipelines, when we're fighting to protect the water or the land, it's never just for us and our benefit. It's for the benefit of the entire planet, for every single person who lives here, because we all need these things to live. We need water. We need food. And these are things that Native people have always tried to make sure that we were providing for our communities. And it's how we've survived genocide. It's how we've continued to survive every single atrocity that we face as Native people. It's by helping each other and bringing each other up with us as we rise and as we move through the world. It's never about leaving people behind. It's always about bringing people with us and, helping them to have the resources that they need. And, we need to kind of return to that. And I've seen it so much in this pandemic, how important knowing where we could go, because we've all had to quarantine. We've had to know where can we quarantine safely to keep ourselves safe from COVID. And, how do we communicate with each other while we're in quarantine? How do we still keep connected? These are all things we've had to learn. Traditional medicines have been important in a lot of our northern communities, especially where they aren't able to just run into town to get cough syrup or, just order something on Amazon and have it delivered the next day. They've had to go back to traditional medicines for a lot of different things that we, especially us in more urban areas, have really gotten spoiled by.
Right. Right.
And how to protect ourselves. We still have to think about this. Wearing a mask, washing your hands, getting vaccinated, doing the things that are necessary, not just to protect ourselves, but to protect our communities. Right. I've seen this play out through the pandemic, and it's been kind of weird to see, how something that I've been teaching in theory come into play in the real world. These are things that I'm doing now in different ways. And it's kind of trippy. It's not something that I thought I would be doing, because for me, it's always been just this theoretical, we're surviving the zombie apocalypse.
Right. But I just want to ask, and we'll start to wind it down, but we do get to smash a little bit of brains, right? We still get to do it. Okay. I want to make sure that we're all taking care of each other, but that's the whole point about being in a zombie apocalypse, is that we all get to be heroes and smash some brains. And also I wanted to add not only the weaponry, but the bow guards. So from our pueblos to protect against bites. So we use our bow guards. I was looking at that after I watched your first panel, and I was like, that'd be great, because then I can make sure I don't get bit right there when they come in. So
yes, exactly. Like we have all the means of protection. And it's kind of funny because, you know, I look at everything that we're dealing with now. Like we're still dealing with select settler colonialism. We're still dealing with, you know, our lands being decimated. We're still dealing with, you know, attempts to even erase us as Indigenous people still.
Right.
So all these skills that we're learning to survive, like we still need them. And,
right.
you know, it's been just kind of a trip over the last couple of years just to see all of our communities kind of coming together in ways that I didn't think really was possible, because we've kind of strayed from these values of, you know, treating each other as, you know, basically equals and as not expendable. You know, so many of our communities have been struggling with internal conflicts over power, over, you know, politics. But then this pandemic happened and you see most of our tribes coming together and doing what they need to protect the people, whether it's shutting down our communities completely, you know, making sure that people are having food delivered to their homes, making sure that medicines are available, making sure that people have what they need to get by. And that's something that we're not really seeing in society at large. But when you look at smaller communities within our larger cities, we're seeing a lot of mutual aid efforts going on. Right. And, you know, it's like, whoa, wait a second, you know, this is a good thing because we're starting to realize that it doesn't have to be dog eat dog. It doesn't have to be every single person on their own for their own. Like we can survive as a community and we can build as a community. It doesn't have to be like when we're watching contemporary zombie movies, you know, where it's like, oh no, it's about us, you know, as individual groups. It's about our survival. It has to be about community.
Right. Brilliant, Johnny J. As always, this is one of my favorite convos. I'm glad we got to bring it here for our indigenuity, because it's truly indigenuity. So I know it's about time that we need to pass on the baton. But if you want to make one last statement, if there's one piece of advice that you will give in terms of surviving the zombie apocalypse, mine is I just have to be faster than Jim. That's all I usually do say. But what is yours to be able to send to everybody as we wrap this up?
Don't panic and shoot anywhere but the brain. Always go for the brain. You know, we know enough about zombies now that there's no reason we should be trying to hit them in the knee or, you know, shooting into the chest. We know the head way to survive. Go for the brain.
Great. Always good ways to go for the brain. Thank you, Johnny J. This is always a pleasure to be able to listen to you chat about this. I'm so excited. I know we got some great programming coming up. Indigenous imagery. This is our Indigenous Day. It's going to continue on. We had a great panel before. There's great panels to come for the rest of the day. Please check it out. You know, here, Facebook Live, wherever you got it. Y'all are wonderful for watching, and I will turn this back over to your hosts at the headquarters itself.